Good evening. And tonight is our lunar observance night here at Abhayagiri, and the community has been practicing together now for the past few months in observance of our annual winter retreat. So we've had a few months so far to really devote ourselves to cultivating more of the formal practice, and we've had a lot of time for withdrawing from the world and worldly activities to be able to focus a lot more on our minds. And for all of us coming into this retreat period, and also the just the practice in general, we all come with expectations, and we all come because we're looking for something. And even coming to a retreat, we're looking for peace and happiness. Maybe in a particular retreat, we're hoping to have special meditative experiences. Maybe we're even hoping to realize enlightenment. And over the past few months of practicing together now, then we've probably experienced many different things, positive and negative experiences, and maybe some of the things that we were hoping for, maybe we have experienced those to some degree, and maybe we haven't at all. But I think for everyone, probably just about everyone here, the reality is that whatever we've experienced in this particular retreat, there's probably still more that we desire in the practice. There's still more to do, and there might still be a lot more to do. So we all find ourselves in this kind of situation in the practice where we have many goals and things that we desire in the practice. We desire quite inspiring, lofty things, deep states of concentration, and to develop deep states of insight. But for many of us, for most of us, we tend to find that there's quite a large gap between where we'd like to be in the practice and where we actually are. And I think that this is a very common experience in retreats, that we, in the beginning of the retreat, we're very inspired and really fired up, and we want to attain different things, and we really jump in. But for most of us, the practice is something that really takes a long time, and for most of us, it's something that takes a lot longer than we've expected. So this is, I think it's good, to point this out, because for most of us, when we do have these kind of expectations or desires in practice that we don't quite meet up to, it's very easy to feel very frustrated in the practice. And I think that that's really very common for people to get very frustrated. You might spend a few months trying to experience a lot of peace, and maybe you don't experience any, or maybe you only experience a very small amount. So it's very easy to feel frustrated and just give up the practice altogether, or maybe just really step back and not really put much effort in anymore. So I think that that's very common in the practice. And but for myself, I there's different similes that I like to contemplate in terms of the practice, because I've found for myself, and I think probably just about everyone who's practiced, that the way that we would like our practice to go, and the way that we expect our practice to go, is usually not really the way that it goes. And a lot of times when I walk through the forest, I like to look at the different trees and sometimes just imagine, what did they look like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And, all of the trees in the forest, even the biggest trees, huge redwood trees that are incredibly impressive, all of them without exception, at one point they were just a tiny little shrub growing out of the ground. And, I like to contemplate that this is very much like our practice, and it's very much like our spiritual practice. We desire, very lofty things, but all of us have to start in kind of the opposite place, a place that's not very lofty, kind of the opposite extreme. We can look at a redwood tree and, it's incredibly inspiring. But, if we looked back many tens or even hundreds of years ago, we probably wouldn't really be inspired by the little shrub growing out of the ground. Wouldn't really give it a second thought. But the things in the world that are impressive and very large, they take a lot of time to develop into that. And it's just like, everyone in the world who accomplishes great things, like, Olympic athletes or people who rise to the top of their field, and kind of world leaders and people like this, everybody without exception, at one point, they couldn't even walk, or they couldn't even talk. They had to learn all of those very, very basic things before they could go on to become something incredibly impressive. So that's very much like our practice is, we have to start with the basics. Like that's the theme of our retreat this year, is back to the basics. And a lot of times we don't really want to be working with the basics. Maybe, we want to be experiencing really profound states of mind. But like all of the things in the world, the trees, the people, there's a process of development that has to take place from the most simple, maybe kind of uninspiring object, and a process that takes usually many years. Trees or people, they take many years to learn how to develop and grow into something which is incredibly impressive. And our spiritual practice is exactly like that. And I think, so often when we first come to the monastery, we're very inspired by meditation masters and, very inspiring senior monks that we live with, and we read the stories of the great meditation masters, incredibly inspiring stories. And so often we compare ourselves to those stories that we read, and sometimes it can be kind of depressing. So many of the Thai meditation masters, if you read their biographies, it's not always the case, but a lot of them, maybe even most of them, even from the time they were children, maybe they had really incredible experiences, and, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them maybe didn't really have that much difficulty in the practice. Maybe in the first year or something, they were already, experiencing really profound fruits of the practice. And, although that's incredibly inspiring, I think that's not really most of our experience. And comparing ourselves to these great masters, that can lead to it can lead to frustration as well, and giving up the practice. And I was recently rereading this one particular biography of Luang Por Thun, who was a really incredible meditation master from Thailand, and his biography is really incredible. One of the most incredible I think I've ever read, and it's on one hand it's very much like what I was mentioning. If you read about his, even when he was a child, I think he talks about having really incredible samadhi experiences, and but what I found really fascinating and inspiring was he was able to recollect many of his past lives, and he tells the reader about what many of those lives were, and it's very inspiring and fascinating to see that and although in this life he seems to have been almost born enlightened and from the beginning, it definitely wasn't always the case, and in so many of his past lives, he cycled from very low states of existence to higher states. But even the times that he recollects as a monk, he still was not perfect. And there's this kind of story episode in his biography where he's paying respects to Luang Pu Khao, and who is also an incredible meditation master, and who can also remember his many of his past lives. And the two of them are kind of discussing their past existences and asking each other questions, and both of them although in this life they were incredible in their meditation, and were able to do incredible things. Both of them had been to hell before for various misdeeds. Both of them had been animals. They both recollected actually their more recent lifetimes when they were monks, and they both actually said that they were monks in the time of the Buddha. And it's really fascinating stories, though, because Luang Por Thun, said he was actually living with Ajahn Mun, who was a leader of a community at that time. But Ajahn Mun, who in this lifetime is incredibly impressive as well, he had a kind of some wrong views or something, and he almost ended up disrobing. This kind of very fascinating story where he Ajahn Mun, in the time of the Buddha, just decided to leave and put on lay clothes and left the monastery. But they all felt that it wasn't a valid disrobal, so he actually came back and kind of continued on as a monk. But reading something like that, you read this in the story of Ajahn Mun in his last life, and he's just seems perfect. And Luang Por Khao as well, he was relating how in one of his past life, living in the time of the Buddha, he says that he was actually one of the monks who followed Devadatta as a newly ordained monk. And he said even though he was very diligent and interested in practice, in that lifetime he didn't really experience the real fruits of the practice. So I really found these stories to be quite fascinating and inspiring, because so often we just focus on the last lifetime of these great meditators, and when we compare ourselves to them, it's just something that we can never match up to. And a lot of times we can just feel like maybe meditation is not really for us. We can't do these kinds of things. So, but reading these stories, we realize that all of these great masters, they were basically just like us, for many lifetimes. No matter where we are in the practice, we can say that, all of these great masters at some point over the past many lifetimes, they were just like us as well. So I think that that's, can be really inspiring to recollect that. And yeah, in terms of, kind of measuring ourselves and frustration in practice, I've thought that it's very interesting how in the world, people really love like the underdog story, in any kind of different areas of life, like sports and business and different areas. We always really like and are really inspired by the underdog, the person who no one really expects to be able to succeed. The sports team that nobody thinks could possibly win, or the person who no one thinks they'll be able to succeed. And the stories of when those people are able to overcome the odds and rise above their limitations. There's something within us that is incredibly inspired by that. Even the American dream, is kind of starting from nothing, starting from a place of poverty and through hard work, working one's way up to the top and to attain success in that way. So it's something that's, deep in our minds, this love and feeling inspiration for the underdog story, and in thinking about why that is, I feel like it's because we're incredibly inspired by somebody who's able to overcome their weaknesses. All of the people who have particular weaknesses, and you feel like they won't be able to win, they won't be able to succeed, and when they are able to overcome their weaknesses and rise above those limitations, it's we find it incredibly inspiring. And I think the reason is because that's basically what all of us are. I think we're all the underdog, and really everyone in the world, even worldly people, they all have weaknesses, and worldly people try to deal with their weaknesses and their defilements in different ways than we do, and mostly unskillful ways. But we all have some kind of weakness, and there's just something inside us that wants to be able to overcome that and to not be held down by it anymore. And seeing the underdogs in the world is incredibly inspiring, that they're able to overcome their weaknesses and their limitations. And I feel like this, spiritual practice is like it's like the ultimate underdog story, because, all of us, in our battle against our defilements and in our battle against our weaknesses, we could say that we're all incredible underdogs. And I've thought that, if you just select a newborn baby at random, completely at random in the world, and you were to ask, what is the probability that baby will grow up to become someone who overcomes their defilements, the probability is almost zero. So in that, this practice of trying to overcome our defilements, it's like the steepest odds, and yet there are people in the world who do overcome their defilements. There are people who actually do it. If if we could have seen them when they were a baby, and we asked what is the chance that they'll overcome their weaknesses and their defilements. If we didn't really know anything about their background, we would say it's almost zero. But there are people who are able to do it, and that's, I feel like this spiritual life is like the ultimate underdog story. And reading these stories of the great masters, particularly if we focus on the fact that they have spent many lifetimes developing this practice, and in many lifetimes when they did have very large weaknesses and they weren't always successful, they're proof. They're the example that it can be done, and they're the sports team that is able to defeat somebody who no one thought that they could. These great masters, they have done something which people would think is impossible. And I find, just recollecting that, I find is incredibly inspiring, and it's something that we can bring back into our own practice, no matter where we are, even if we spend several months in a retreat and we don't have any success and we have only suffering, instead of allowing that to really cause us frustration and depression, I think it's very useful, very inspiring to recollect that, even the great masters were like us as well. So a lot of times when we first come to the monastery, then we see the very inspiring examples of practitioners, and we read these stories, and we consider somebody like Lumpur Cha or the great meditation masters. We kind of consider them to be perfect and like, a 100%, like A+, in the spiritual life. And maybe for us, when we look at ourselves, maybe we feel like we're a zero or something, like a 0%. And, over time, we practice and put forth this effort in following these teachings. They're able to develop ourselves, very gradually, like the trees, able to develop gradually. But a lot of times, we might spend years, battling our weaknesses, and sometimes, for a lot of us, we might not feel like we've really progressed much, or maybe only a very small amount. So it's kind of like, over time, if we practice skillfully, then we will see changes within ourselves. We will see the mind moving in a positive direction, our negative emotions starting to decrease. But a lot of times we have the experience of, maybe after many years, we would consider ourselves maybe like a 10%, a 20%, and maybe after many years we get to a point where we kind of feel like we've gained some kind of ground against a lot of our problems, and we've had some kind of little successes, but maybe we still consider ourselves to be like a 50% when we compare ourselves with the great masters who we aspire to be. And just like in school, like a 50% is like an F. So we might sometimes still have this experience of like we've practiced for many years, but when we compare ourselves to the ideal and compare ourselves to the meditation masters, we might still feel like a failure. But I think it's also very important to reflect on where we've come from, and reflect on what things used to be like for us before we started practicing, or in the early stages of practice. And you can find, I find quite a helpful reflection, if we consider ourselves, to kind of be a failure in meditation. Most likely, if we've been practicing for a considerable amount of time, if we look back, we will be able to see improvements, even if they're only small improvements. And if we consider ourselves to be like a 50%, still a failure, but that's actually a very large amount of progress, from 0 to 50, and it's actually halfway to 100%. And also, like in school, the 50% and the 0% are both considered like a failing grade, but they're not worth the same. The 50% is actually worth more. If the class is graded on points, so even though you kind of look at them and you say, oh, they're both failures, but one is actually a lot better than the other. And I find that this is a really good reflection that we can have, when we judge our own progress in the practice. For most of us, I think we're probably, not exactly where we would like to be. And for a lot of us, it's probably really far away from where we'd like to be. But, when we look at the past and we consider, what we used to be like and the problems that we used to have, we can see that there has been progress, and we can use this reflection that, even if we feel like, in the broad scope of things, we're really not that much of a success at meditation, or we're not really, that amazing. If we have progressed, and, maybe we've progressed quite a lot, that can be, very inspiring to bring that up in the mind. We might not be where we want to be, might not be really big success in our meditation, but we are getting there, slowly. We're slowly working our way there. And this is, I find, is a really helpful reflection for continuing to motivate ourselves when we run into difficulties and challenges in the practice, and practice doesn't really go exactly how we think it should, or progress as fast or as smoothly as we think it should. And I was thinking, this theme of the underdog story, and working with our limitations. There's many stories that I can remember. I was thinking, a few stories that I can remember from childhood that are really beautiful stories that demonstrate this theme as well. I really like to bring these to mind as well in those situations where we don't really feel like we're measuring up to our expectations. And both of these stories, probably everyone has heard these maybe when they were children, but these kind of classic stories that we teach to children. The story of the tortoise and the hare, which, as people know, is the race between the fast rabbit and the very slow turtle. And no one would think that a turtle would ever be able to beat a rabbit in a race. And as the story goes, the rabbit runs out to a very quick lead, but then kind of becomes overconfident and decides to take a bit of a rest. And as he's sleeping, then the turtle is able to slowly push by him and win the race. And this is a great story, that teaches children in a very, very simple way that through effort we can overcome our limitations. Through steady effort we can defy the odds and do what no one ever thought that we could do. And also one of my other very favorite stories from childhood is the story probably everyone knows about the group of ducks living together, and one of the ducks is not like the other ducks, and the duckling that doesn't look like all of the other ones, and it's very ugly. And the other ducklings kind of look down on that duckling and consider it to be kind of the lowest and the most ugly duckling. Something very strange about it. It doesn't really fit in with the other ducks, but as people know, as the story progresses and the ugly duckling develops and grows and matures, eventually it starts to become apparent that the ugly duckling is not actually a duck at all. And eventually, it becomes apparent that this strange bird is actually like a beautiful swan. And eventually it leaves and it soars away where the ducks can't go. And I find this incredibly beautiful, inspiring story, because it's proof that even those who are considered maybe the lowest in society and those who have the most problems, we never really know what our potential is. We never really know what kind of potential we have, and if we develop ourselves, even in a situation where we feel like we're lower than everyone else, whether in the monastery or in the world, it is possible to go beyond our limitations. It's possible to perhaps become something which is even more inspiring than the others. And the mind which has defilements is even the Buddha said is kind of ugly. It's impure, ugly. The mind with defilements is like the ugly duckling. It doesn't feel at ease in the world. Wherever it goes, it's not able to completely fit in. It's not able to be really at ease. But just like the ugly duckling, all of these defilements, they can be worked with. They can be overcome. We can purify our minds, and learning how to overcome the ugly qualities of the mind, we may be able to experience something within ourselves that is infinitely more beautiful and profound than anything else in the world. So these are just a few reflections for this evening, and I'll offer that for